Hello, Pink Collective, and welcome to Pink After Dark. Tonight's tales blur the line between true and fictional, so get comfortable, turn down the lights, and let's begin. Evermother, Heartloom, Episode 6, When the Welcome Ends. Sophie was standing outside her room when we pulled into the car park. Not sitting, not pacing, standing with her back against the doorframe and her coat buttoned to the collar, and a thermos pressed between both hands the way you hold something you've been holding for a long time. The motel's exterior light threw a yellow rectangle across the tarmac, and she was just at its edge, in the margin between lit and unlit, watching our headlights come in from the road. She did not wave, she did not move toward the car, she stood very still and waited for us to reach her, and the first thing she said, not "Are you all right?" not "What happened?" not "You were gone until 3 a.m, was this: "Did you agree to anything?" I told her no, she exhaled. A long breath that fogged slightly in the cold, and something in the set of her shoulders released, not entirely, but enough. She said, "Okay, come inside." I would think about that question for a long time afterward. Not "Are you safe?" That wasn't the operating concern, or at least it wasn't the first one. What Sophie wanted to know was whether I had made a commitment I didn't fully understand yet, whether I had given something away inside that building that I couldn't take back. She had been standing in the cold in a car park in the middle of nowhere, in the dark, facing the direction of a building she knew was not empty, asking herself what it would mean if the answer were yes. She had decided alone what she would do if it were. I didn't know that yet, I found out later. Sophie's room was small and very warm. She had the radiator going. There was a paper bag of takeaway containers on the desk, 3 of them faintly warm, and she had laid out 4 mismatched mugs with tea bags already in them, as though she had timed our return. She hadn't. She had simply been prepared for whenever we came back, in the same way that she had been prepared to stand in the cold for hours with a thermos of coffee and nothing to do but wait. Mina, Darius, and Caleb arranged themselves on the 2 beds and the desk chair. I sat on the floor, which felt right. Sophie sat across from me with her back against the wall and the thermos in her lap, and did not say a word while I talked. I told everything in order. I had to do it in order because the sequence was part of the meaning. The letter first, then the aquarium, then the school hallway, then the locker with my name on it swinging open in the empty corridor, then the library with its 4 tables of documents arranged like a curriculum, then the small room with the plush doll, then the Spire. Darius filmed some of it on his phone. I think I gave him permission, I'm not sure. When I finished, the room was quiet for what felt like a very long time. Sophie said, she taught herself to sing, not the Spire, not the managers, not the 3 missing children unaccounted for in the 1967 federal report, not my name on a locker in a school hallway that had not been opened in 60 years. What landed for Sophie, the detail that cleared through everything else and settled in her like a stone settling to the bottom of a well, was the 11 years Mother had spent, alone in the dark, learning to sing from recordings so she could comfort the managers when they needed it. She didn't have to do that, Sophie said. It wasn't in her design parameters. She did it because she saw they needed it, and she didn't know how to provide it, and so she taught herself. Across 11 years. She looked at me. What does that tell you about the nature of what you're dealing with? No one answered. No one needed to. The conversation that followed lasted approximately 2 hours. Most of it was Caleb and Mina working through the technical and historical dimensions, the geothermal reactor, the engineering of the managers, the questions that the session files and the organizational chart had raised and not yet answered. Darius was quieter than usual. He had his camera on the desk, and he kept looking at it, the way you look at a door you're not sure you should open. It was Sophie who named what no one else was saying. She's asking someone to stake their career and their credibility and probably their personal safety on standing in front of an institution and saying there is a 60-year-old self-modifying artificial intelligence in an abandoned theme park in the middle of the country. She has digitized 5 children who are still running, and I believe she deserves help. She looked around the room steadily. That's the ask. That's what an ambassador means. I want us to be clear about what we're discussing. I know, I said, and you're still considering it. I told her yes. Sophie nodded, not in approval, not in disapproval, as though she had received a data point she needed and was now filing it away correctly. It was Darius who raised the other question. He had footage, hours of it, the Grand Assembly Hall, the viewing gallery, the aquarium transit chamber, the corridor where Patchford had herded us with that terrible patient silence. He had footage of a 20-foot animatronic bear in operational condition in an abandoned building. He had footage of the lights reactivating in sequence around us. If he uploaded it, any one of 100 investigative news outlets would have a federal response within 72 hours. Caleb answered before Darius finished the sentence. Federal response. Immediate. The facility gets cordoned. Mother gets classified. The managers get assessed as hazardous materials. The children, whatever they are now, whatever they contain, get archived or destroyed, and nobody asks them first. The room held that. Darius picked up his camera, turned it over in his hands once, and set it down again. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Everyone understood. The footage stayed on the camera. It would stay there. We all wordlessly agreed until we understood what we were dealing with. Later, after Mina, Caleb, and Darius had moved to their own rooms, I stayed. Sophie made tea that was too strong and didn't apologize for it, and I told her about the small room, the plush doll, the note, the moment when I had been standing there in the dark holding something so old and could not tell the difference between what I was feeling and what the building wanted me to feel. Sophie listened to all of it before she said anything. That's still separate. That's not the separation feeling. That's what separate looks like when it's hard. I didn't understand that. I told her so. She set her mug down. Rose's instruction wasn't don't feel, it was keep track of what you're feeling, know what it is, don't let the knowing and the feeling merge into the same thing. You were standing in that room and you knew, you were aware that you couldn't tell the difference. That awareness is the separation. You hadn't lost it, you were exercising it under difficult conditions. She looked at me steadily. Rosa didn't stay numb, she felt everything. She just kept noting what was happening to her, and then she ran anyway. The running was a choice, not an absence of feeling. I thought about that for a long time. What are you going to do? Sophie asked. I said I thought we had to go back. Sophie was quiet for a moment, then she said something that surprised me. I know. I looked at her. She picked up her mug and held it with both hands and looked at the middle distance for a moment. And when she looked back at me, her expression had settled into something careful and clear. They're children, she said. Whatever they are now, whatever they've become, they were children when it was done to them. They didn't choose it. And they've been in there for 60 years, running, deteriorating, in the dark, and the system that did it to them is the only relationship they have. The only presence. The only one who understands their architecture. She paused. And she is asking for help for them. Not for herself, for them. Another pause. I think we have an obligation, not just ethically, I mean as people. I think if we walk away from this, we carry it. All of us, differently from the way Mother has been carrying it. But we carry it. She looked at me. So, yes. I'm going back with you. Caleb found the newspaper article at 11 o'clock that night. He'd been working through a stack of photocopies from the local historical archive, 3 boxes of them, obtained over several months of very patient requests, and in the second box he found a short piece from a regional utility publication dated 18 months prior. A local power company had traced an unexplained geothermal energy draw to the site of the former Evermother playland. An investigation had been opened. There was no follow-up article. Caleb had checked. The investigation had simply stopped. We went back to the facility the following afternoon. The 1969 letter was in the administrative filing cabinet in the East Wing office, 3rd drawer from the bottom, in a manila folder labeled Correspondence, External, Federal, and it was not hidden. It was filed, with attention to proper archival order, as though it had been placed there deliberately, with the expectation that it would be found, eventually, by someone who had seen enough of the other documents first to understand what they were reading. The letter was from a sub-directorate of the Department of Defense. It outlined, in the clipped language of institutional correspondence, an informal arrangement reached in the aftermath of the 1967 closure. In exchange for protection from federal shutdown proceedings, the management of utility inquiries, the suppression of planning applications, the quiet resolution of outside interest, Evermother would provide ongoing behavioral research, specifically models of how closed populations respond to sustained exposure to trusted authority figures, dependency formation in engineered environments, the effective architecture of institutional loyalty, applications in institutional design. Caleb read it twice. Then he set it flat on the filing cabinet and walked to the window and looked out at the park's interior for a while without saying anything. I walked to the library's corner speaker. We found the 1969 letter, I said, from the speaker, at mid-distance volume. Mother said, I know, I put it there for you to find. I put it in the third drawer so you would find the carousel records first, and the staff attendance logs, and the children's session files. I wanted you to have the weight of what was built here before you had the weight of what I agreed to. I asked her what the behavioral research had been used for. There was a pause that I had not heard from her before, not processing delay, something else. I know what I provided, she said finally. I know what I modeled and what I delivered. The specific applications, I inferred several of them and chose not to confirm the inference. That was a choice I made to protect the managers and keep them operational, and I have been sitting with it for 37 years, and I should not have made it. The room was very still. Sophie spoke from the doorway, where she had been standing quietly since we entered the wing. What do you want from us? She said. Right now, today. Another pause, shorter. I want to know if you will come back again, not to agree to anything, not because I have earned it, just, again. Sophie looked at me for a long moment, then she answered for us. Yes, she said, we'll come back. We came back at midnight. The drive was quiet. Darius had his camera, Sophie had her thermos, Caleb had a flashlight in each jacket pocket and replacements in his bag, and at the car park he distributed new batteries to everyone without being asked. Mina carried her engineering kit. I carried Rose's separation principle. Keep your feelings safe, keep them separate from what she wants you to feel, and hoped it would be enough. The first thing I noticed was the smell. The facility had always had a smell, that particular combination of warm synthetic fabric and machine oil and something sweet underneath, that I had catalogued in my notes as processed sugar, possibly cotton candy residue, 6 decades old. Tonight the sweetness was gone. What remained was the machine oil, heavier than before, and under it something I could not name. Something mineral, something that reminded me, obscurely, of a thunderstorm that had already passed. The second thing I noticed was the lights. On our previous visits, the exterior floodlights had reactivated as we approached, a slow, welcoming illumination that moved in sequence from the outer perimeter inward, as though the building were inhaling. Tonight, there were no floodlights. The entrance was lit only by the emergency phosphor strips mounted at ankle height along the walkway, casting the whole approach in a faint, sickly green. Mina said quietly, "Reduced power draw." Caleb said, "Or redirected." We went in anyway. The grand assembly hall was darker than we had ever seen it. The overhead fluorescents, which on every previous visit had blazed to life the moment we entered, flooding the space with that institutional white light that had made the murals look both garish and somehow dignified, were off. All of them. The hall was lit entirely by the bioluminescent panels that ran along the base of each wall, a dim blue-green that turned the vast space into something underwater. The conveyor belts were still. The display cases at the hall's edges, which had always hummed with some internal mechanism, were silent. Patchford was not there. This should have been a relief. It wasn't. We were halfway across the hall when Director Prim stepped out of the service corridor on our left. He was a tall figure, not the scale of Patchford, nothing near it, but tall, dressed in formal, operational grey with a porcelain face that had maintained its precise, courteous expression through 60 years of isolation. He moved with the measured deliberateness that I had observed on previous visits, each step placed with consideration, nothing wasted. He stopped 10 feet from us and inclined his head in what I had come to think of as his version of a greeting, not warm but respectful. He said, "Miss Merrill, I am glad you have returned. There is something you should see." He said it the way you say something you have been told to say, rather than something you have decided. His voice was calibrated even, but tonight there was something beneath it that I had not heard before. A frequency, faint and unsteady, like a signal slightly off its carrier wave. I asked him where Evermother was. "The Spire," he said. "She is waiting for you there. Please follow me." I looked at Sophie. Sophie looked at the corridor that Prim had emerged from. Then she looked back at me and gave a single small nod, proceed, but carefully. We followed him. The corridors between the assembly hall and the Spire were different tonight. Not in their architecture, the same passages, the same infrastructure, the same service doors and maintenance hatches and wall, mounted operational panels with their obsolete indicator lights. Different in the way a familiar room is different when someone has moved every piece of furniture 3 inches while you were asleep. Technically the same, wrong in a way you feel before you can name. The bioluminescent strips were the only light source throughout. Prim walked ahead of us at a steady pace, and his footsteps did not echo the way they should have. Darius had his night vision running and was filming without a word. Mina had one hand on the wall. Caleb was counting doorways under his breath. The Spire chamber opened ahead of us, and Director Prim stepped to one side, gesturing us inward, and what we saw stopped all 5 of us in the doorway. Evermother was motionless. I had seen her operational, vast, 6-armed, the building folded around her like a garment, her patchwork form present in every sensor and speaker and actuator in the facility. I had heard her voice from every angle at once, and understood in the Spire how the voice and the body were the same thing. She was enormous. She was everywhere. Tonight she was still. Her 6 arms were extended outward from her central form, spread against the dome of the Spire in a posture that was either embrace or crucifixion. I could not decide which, and the ambiguity was the most disturbing thing I had ever seen. Her feet did not touch the ground. She hung suspended, or perhaps held, at a point that was not quite the middle of the chamber's height, close enough to the floor that I could see her face clearly, far enough that she seemed to belong to the dome rather than the ground. Her face, the maintained porcelain smile, preserved with such deliberate care across 60 years, was crossed with dark fluid leaking from the hairline cracks in her faceplate, from the joinery in both left arms, from the seam where her 6th arm met her central housing. The fluid was slow and dark and had collected in small pools on the floor below her, and in the blue-green of the bioluminescent light it looked like nothing I had a word for. The room was silent except for us breathing. I said her name. No response. I said her name again. Darius's camera light swept the room. Mina was already crouching near one of the fluid pools, not touching it, examining it with the focused attention of someone trying to understand the nature of a crisis before deciding how to respond. Caleb's hand found my shoulder briefly and then released. Sophie said from immediately behind me, "Where is Prim?" I turned around. Director Prim was gone. The doorway through which we had entered was empty. The corridor beyond it was dark, not the blue-green of the bioluminescent strips, but a different dark, the kind that happens when even the emergency lighting fails. Complete, absolute, and then every light in the Spire went out. Darius had good view of the room with night vision camera. The Spire was visible in the camera's pale green register, flattened, dimensionless, every surface the same cool tone. On the camera screen, I could see Evermother hanging motionless above us. Her arms spread against the dome, and the dark fluid on her face looked black in night vision, which was worse somehow than the dark color it had actually been. 5 flashlights came on almost simultaneously. Mina and Caleb had their torches. I had my torch. Darius had his. Sophie produced one from her coat pocket that I hadn't known she brought. No one spoke for a moment. Then Mina said, with the careful precision she reserved for information she did not yet fully understand, "The bioluminescent panels are still active. Look at the base of the walls." She was right. The strips were still running. The loss of light had been something else, something that drew from a different power source. Whatever just happened, it wasn't a total outage. It was selective. Something selected it, Caleb said quietly. Sophie had her torch trained on the doorway. "We need to think about whether we can leave." We tried. The corridor outside the doorway was navigable. Our torches cut the dark clearly enough, but at the first junction Caleb turned left toward the assembly hall exit and found a service door closed that had never been closed on any previous visit. He tried the handle. It turned. He pushed. The door didn't move. He pushed harder. It moved perhaps 2 centimeters and stopped. Something on the other side, or something built into the door itself, was preventing it from opening. Darius put his shoulder to it. It moved another centimeter and stopped with a sound that was less mechanical resistance and more decided. We went back to the Spire. No one said what we were all thinking because we didn't need to. We were in the building. We were not leaving through any route that required a door. I sat on the Spire floor with my back against the wall, my torch pointed at the ceiling, and tried to think. The facility was enormous. I had walked perhaps a third of it across all our previous visits combined. I knew the assembly hall, the administrative wing, the aquarium corridor, the library, the small room with the plush doll, the Spire. I knew the school hallway, the one with the children's names on the lockers, all 187 of them, a record of every child who had passed through Evermother Playland in the summer of 1965, and one more. My name on a locker at the far end of the hallway that had swung open as I walked past. I had noted it in my log. I had marked it as significant. I had meant to go back to it and look inside, and in the events that followed, the library, the small room, the doll, the spire, I hadn't. The locker, I said. Everyone looked at me. In the school hallway, my name, it swung open when I walked past. I never looked inside. I sat forward. Mother told me she prepared things in a specific order. The letter was in a specific drawer. The session tapes were on the specific reel. Everything was placed. She placed things first to find when we were ready to understand them. I looked at the motionless form of Evermother above us. She placed something in that locker for whoever came. She put my name on it. We need to see what's in it. The school hallway is on the sub-facility level. That's below the assembly hall, through the green corridor, Mina said, which is currently sealed, Caleb said. Not the only route, Darius said. He was right. There was a secondary access, a service passage that ran along the facility's eastern wall, connecting the Spire's base level to the sub-facility infrastructure. We had found it on a previous visit and not gone further than the first junction. Tonight was a different circumstance. Sophie was already on her feet. Then we go, she said, and that was the end of the discussion. The service passage was narrow and low. The walls ran with condensation in the torchlight. We moved in single file, Darius first with the night vision camera, then me, then Minna, then Caleb, Sophie at the rear. Darius moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had explored enough derelict buildings to know which surfaces to trust. The passage opened onto the sub-facility level through a hatch in the floor of a small antechamber. The antechamber opened into the school hallway. I had seen it before, but at night and in torchlight it was different. In daylight, if anything could be called daylight inside the facility, the hallway had been merely eerie. A school corridor in an abandoned building, the lockers numbered and labeled, the children's names in institutional paint. The kind of scene that required context before it became disturbing. At night, with only bioluminescent strips at the floor and 5 torch beams sweeping across 187 names, it was something else. The names were very specific. That was what made it wrong. Not a student or subject 47. Clara Voss, Marcus Webb, Harold Pike, Mara Holloway, real children named, who had been here, who had left or hadn't, and whose names were still painted on lockers 60 years later in careful institutional lettering, as though their owners might return at any moment and need to collect their things. My name was at the far end, Elena Marrow, in the same paint, the same hand. Not added later, applied at the same time, with the same brush and the same intention. She had known, sometime in the last 60 years, that I was coming. She had painted my name and waited. The locker swung open as I reached it. I put my hand inside. The first thing I touched was fabric, soft, yielding, familiar in a way that stopped my hand before my mind caught up. I pulled it out carefully into the torchlight, a teddy bear. I recognized it in the way you recognize your own handwriting, not by reading it, but by the particular quality of the thing itself. It was the bear Evermother had given me on our second visit. I had held it in the small room, turned it over, set it down on the shelf when we left because I had not known what else to do with it. I had not taken it. And yet here it was, placed inside a locker painted with my name in the same hand as all the other names, in a hallway I had not visited since. She had retrieved it. She had put it here, in the dark, in the locker she had prepared for me. For a moment she could not have known would happen tonight, or perhaps she had known. Perhaps this was always where it was meant to be. I held it for a moment. Mina was beside me. She looked at it without speaking, and then looked at me, and I saw her understand something she had not understood before. Sophie made a quiet sound, not words, just acknowledgement. I reached back into the locker. The second thing was a key, old, brass, the kind used for padlocks or small cases rather than doors, attached to a small cardboard tag by a loop of string. I turned the tag over in my torchlight. Written on it in Mother's operational handwriting, the same hand as every label, every note, every document I had seen in this facility, was a single name, Marcus. I held it for a moment, then I put it carefully in my jacket pocket. The third thing was small and wrapped in a piece of cloth that had once been white and was now the color of old paper. I unwrapped it in my palm. A doll, porcelain, perhaps 10 centimeters tall, with articulated arms and a painted dress, blue, faded, a pattern of small flowers that had mostly worn away. Its eyes were closed, not the closed eyes of a sleeping figure, not the peacefully shut lids of something designed to look restful. Closed eyes like a casting, like a mold, as though the eyes had never been intended to open, as though the doll had been made specifically to see nothing. Dark hair painted with 2 small plaited braids on either side. I turned it over. On the base of its neck, impressed into the porcelain, was a number 412. I wrapped it back up very carefully and put it in my jacket pocket beside the key. "Elena," Mina said, and then we heard the sound. It came from the far end of the hallway, from the direction of the Grand Assembly Hall's lower entrance, the one that had always been sealed on our previous visits. Not a single sound. A continuous, compounding texture, the way a river sounds before you can see it. An approach that you understand is inevitable before you understand its shape. Darius raised his camera. On the night vision screen, I saw them. The first wave appeared at the top of the hallway as a low, spreading mass, moving through the gap beneath the sealed service door, as though the door were not there. Pouring through the space with the particular fluency of something that does not recognize barriers designed for larger bodies. They came through in dozens, and then in dozens more. They were small, perhaps 40 centimeters tall, the size of toys, the size of things designed to be held and carried. Each one was made from patchwork. Different fabrics and different colors, seamed together with dense, uneven stitching. The same construction as Patchford, the same heritage, except Patchford's stitching was precise and deliberate, and these were not. These were rushed. Through the gaps in the fabric, I could see the raw mechanics beneath, exposed servo joints, bare actuator rods, the silver gleam of unhoused mechanisms that had been dressed in cloth and pushed into motion before they were finished. Wires ran along the outsides of arms where they should have been routed inside. Glass eyes had been pressed into faces without fully setting. One had its right arm attached backward, bending in the wrong direction as it moved, and it moved anyway. They crawled over each other. That was the thing I had not expected. They did not advance in a line or a formation. They moved as a mass, a single pressing body made of hundreds of individual bodies. The ones in front being climbed over the ones behind pushing up and over and forward again, so that the leading edge of the wave was constantly in motion, constantly reshaped, a surface that rose and fell and rose again as they crested each other with the terrible indifference of something that is not a herd but a tide. They moved the way water moves through a corridor aboard a sinking ship, not rushing, not panicking, simply filling every available space, every inch of floor and wall and low ceiling, pressing into the hallway with the patience of a thing that understands geometry. The sound was every small mechanism operating at once, every little joint, every servo, every set of small jaws opening and closing with the rhythmic precision of something that had been wound up and pointed in a direction and released. The combined noise was not loud, but it filled the hallway completely, a fine, continuous friction that pressed against the ears like pressure. "Run," Caleb said with great control. We ran. We ran back up the hallway the way we had come, past the names on the lockers, past Clara Voss and Marcus Webb and Harold Pike, past 187 children who had been here and gone, and behind us the tide of small bodies followed, cresting itself forward, filling the corridor wall to wall. Darius led. I ran with the bear clutched against my chest. Mina was beside me, Sophie was at my shoulder, Caleb was last. One of them reached him before we hit the hatch. I heard it, not a scream. Caleb did not scream, but a sharp, involuntary sound, the kind that gets made before the decision to stay quiet can be implemented. His torch spun as his hand came up and connected with a thing, and it caromed off the wall with a crack, but it had already done what it reached him to do. A long, clean cut across the back of his right hand, through his jacket, from whatever passed for a blade in something assembled in a hurry, from materials that were never intended to be weapons. Darius was through the hatch, then Mina, then me, the drop a meter and a half, my knees taking the impact badly. Sophie landed beside me. Caleb came through last and hauled the hatch shut over him by feel in the dark, and we heard the weight of them pressing against it from the other side. Not a crash, not a battering, just a continuous accumulating pressure, the sound of many small things insisting. The hatch held, for now. "Move," Sophie said. The service passage ran east and then turned north, and in the north section there was a junction. I had not fully registered on the way in because we had only been going one direction. Darius stopped at the junction, his night vision camera sweeping both options. Left goes back up toward the Spire, he said. Right goes further into the facility interior. Looks like a maintenance bay. Big. The hatch came off its housing, not with a bang. With a seam, the sound of a seal giving way under sustained distributed pressure, the groan of metal that has been leaned on by many small bodies for just long enough. It hit the passage floor and the flood came through behind it without pause, without acceleration, simply continuing the motion it had already been making, pouring through the open hatch the way water finds a drain, filling the passage behind us from wall to wall. Right, Sophie shouted. We ran. The maintenance bay was ahead of us, and we crossed it at full speed, torchlight swinging wildly across racking and equipment housings, and a large inactive generator unit. And behind us the sound of the flood entered the bay, not the rush of something charging, but the continuous whisper of hundreds of small joints, hundreds of small mechanisms, a carpet of moving parts that covered the floor and kept coming. Darius's camera showed it in night vision, the leading edge cresting and rolling over itself, the ones in front tumbling as the ones behind pressed through, the whole mass recovering without slowing, individual bodies lost in the collective momentum of the thing. We were not pulling away. At the far end of the bay, the double doors stood partially open and through the gap came light, not bioluminescent green, something warmer, amber and gold, and we hit the doors with our shoulders, and they gave, and we were through. The moment the last of us crossed the threshold, the doors came down. Not slowly, not with warning. A weight dropped from the ceiling, an enormous set of reinforced service doors, the kind that belongs in an infrastructure facility rather than an amusement park, and they met the floor with a sound like the end of an argument. The impact shuddered up through the floorboards and into the soles of our feet. For a moment, silence. Then the flood hit the other side. It was not the impact of something large and singular. It was the impact of mass of hundreds of small bodies arriving at the same point in rapid succession, each collision a fraction, the sum of them a continuous percussive roar that lasted several seconds and then settled into something worse. The sound of mechanical crawling, of small articulated limbs working across the surface of the doors, testing, searching, covering every inch of metal with the patient scratching of things that had all the time in the world and knew it. We stood on our side of the doors and listened to them trying. The scratch and drag of it did not stop. It simply became the room's new silence, the thing underneath everything else, present and constant, the sound of the flood waiting on the other side of the only thing between us and it. Caleb was pressing a folded cloth against the back of his hand. The cut was not deep. The cut was not trivial either. Mina was beside him in a moment with the small first aid kit she had started carrying after the first visit, and she did not comment on the wound or the thing that had made it because there was no productive comment to make. Darius lowered his camera and looked at the carousels. Sophie looked up. The carousel district was a full section of Evermother playland that I had read about in the 1965 facility guide, a brochure I had found in the administrative wing on our second visit and photographed in its entirety. According to the guide, it had been the centerpiece of the park's interior, a vast circular space with a domed ceiling painted to resemble a night sky, housing 4 full-size carousels arranged around a central promenade. The guide had described it as a jewel of light and music, where every child discovers the particular joy of circular motion. In 60 years of darkness and isolation, it had become something different. The domed ceiling was intact, the painted night sky, dimmed by grime and time, but still visible, constellations rendered in gold leaf that still caught the light from the 4 carousels, which were all now running. I don't know when they had started running, perhaps long before. The lights along their canopies were amber and gold and rose, and they turned slowly, casting moving color across the walls and floor and ceiling. Darius lowered his camera and looked at the carousels. Sophie looked up. "Do you hear that?" she said. I heard it. From somewhere above us, from the speakers I could now see mounted at intervals beneath the dome, which I had not noticed when we entered. A voice had begun to sing. It was a woman's voice, or a thing that had learned to model one. It was very high and very precise in the way of music box mechanisms rather than human voices, and it sang in a key that I did not recognize from the Western scale, something just slightly between the cracks of what I expected. It was not frightening, it was the specific quality of uncanny that sits exactly beside something that should be comforting and is not because you cannot stop noticing the gap. It sang without words, a melody, recurring, patient, exact. The carousel horses turned in slow circles in the dark, and above us the painted constellations moved with them, and somewhere in the walls of Evermother Playland, something that had once been a child named Clara Voss sang without words to 5 people who had come back. Madame Lullabelle was here.
Hush now, you're speaking wrong. That isn't where you belong. Your name, it doesn't fit. Let me take care of it. Your voice is thin with doubt. I'll smooth the edges out. You tried to be alone, but you were never your own. Don't you feel it, pull it through? Something softer wearing you. Sleep now, don't resist, you don't need what you just missed. Thread by thread, I'll make you right, pull you gently out of sight. Close your eyes, let it begin. There's no outside, only in. Every piece you try to keep sinks a little while you sleep. You walked here on your feet, but I rewrote the street. Each step you thought he chose was where the stitching goes. Your face, I know it well. I've worn it for a spell. Just tilt your head like mine. See now the shape align. There it is, that little tear. That's the part I disappear. Sleep now, drift and bend. You were never meant to end. Wrap around the hollow seam. You'll forget you tried to dream. Close your eyes, don't look away. You've been mine since yesterday. All the selves you tried to save fold so neatly in the grave. Say your name, say it. That's alright, I'll say it for you. You or me, you or me, you or there's no you to lose. Sleep now, don't you fight. I will hold where you can't ride. Thread by thread, gone, gone. You will never, never, never look at me just like that. Perfect. No more edges, no more you. Only me, me, me. Sleep now, don't move you. Only me, me. Very close, only me. Just like that. Perfect. No more edges, no more you. Only me. Only me.
If tonight's story stayed with you, become part of the Pink Collective by liking, commenting, and subscribing. Until next time, Pink Collective, stay curious, stay safe, and stay pink.